I want to believe that the US will stand by our side. We have been ready for that not to be the case. We need to be able to recognize the Russian threat and better defend ourselves in order to deter such attack. We need to provide ourselves with more arms. We need to do more than we have in the past to reinforce our security. The future of Europe cannot be decided in Washington or Moscow. This sentence right here epitomizes the collapse of the US-European relationship. This shows a complete lack of trust. And the whole speech by Macron was basically showing a lack of trust. That we cannot trust the United States to look out for Europe's security. We cannot trust the United States to look out for the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, to stand by NATO, to stand by Article 5, which he attacked on the campaign trail. And after he has not gone back on so much abandonment towards US allies, you cannot assume that he won't, that he would go back on his snubbing of Article 5, leading to him saying the future of Europe cannot be decided in Washington or Moscow. Washington or Moscow. Here's a French senator talking about Washington, D.C. right now, and I thought it was interesting. I just wanted to play it.
Washington est devenu la cour de
Washington has become Nero's
un
court,
empereur
an
incendiaire,
incendiary
des courtisans
emperor,
soumis
submissive
et un
courtiers,
bouffon
and a
sous
jester
kétamine
on
chargé de
ketamine,
l'épuration de la fonction
responsible
publique.
for purging the civil
C'est un drame pour le monde
service. It's a
libre,
tragedy for
mais
the
c'est
free
d'abord un drame pour les
world, but it is first and foremost a tragedy for the United
États-Unis.
States.
Le message de Trump
Trump's message
est
is
que rien ne
there
sert
is no
d'être son
point
allié
in being
puisqu'il
his
ne vous
ally
défendra
since he
pas,
will not defend
qu'il
you,
vous imposera
and
plus
he
de
will
droits de
impose
douane qu'à
more
ses
duties
ennemis
and customs on you than his
et vous
enemies,
menacera de
and will
s'emparer de vos
threaten to
territoires
take possession of your land
tout en soutenant
by
les
supporting
dictatures qui vous
dictatorships that
envahissent.
attack you.
Le roi du
The
deal est
deal
en train de
king
montrer ce
is
qu'est
showing
l'art
what
du
the
deal
art
à
of the
plat ventre.
submission is about.
Il pense qu'il va
He
intimider la
thinks he
Chine en se
will
couchant devant
intimidate China
Poutine,
by
mais
surrendering
Xi
to
Jinping
Putin.
devant un tel
But Xi
naufrage
Jinping, in the
est
face
sans
of
doute en
such
train
danger, is undoubtedly in the
d'accélérer les
process of
préparatifs
speeding up in preparations for the invasion
de
of
l'invasion de
Taiwan.
Taïwan. Jamais dans
Never in
l'histoire un
history
président des
has a
États-Unis
president
n'a
of the United
capitulé devant
States capitulated
l'ennemi.
before the enemy.
Jamais aucun n'a
Nor
soutenu un
has he
agresseur
ever supported an
contre un
aggressor
allié.
against an ally.
Jamais aucun n'a
None has
piétiné la
ever
Constitution
trampled on the American
américaine, pris autant de
Constitution,
décrets
taken as many
illégaux,
illegal
révoqué les juges
decrees,
qui pourraient l'en
fired the
empêcher,
judges that could
limogé
stop
d'un
him,
coup l'état-major
sacked at once
militaire,
the military staff,
affaibli tous les
weakened all the checks and
contre-pouvoirs et pris
balances,
le
and took
contrôle des
control
réseaux
of
sociaux.
social media.
Ce n'est pas une
It's
dérive
not a
illibérale,
drift to
c'est un début de
illiberalism. It is
confiscation de la
the start
démocratie.
of the confiscation
Rappelons-nous
of
qu'il
democracy.
n'a fallu
Let's
qu'un mois,
not
3
forget that it
semaines et
only
2
took 3 months, 2
jours
weeks and 2 days
pour
to
mettre à
put
bas la
down the
République de
Weimar
Weimar
Republic
et
and
sa
its
constitution.
constitution.
J'ai confiance dans
I
la
have
solidité de la
confidence in the
démocratie
solidarity of American
américaine
democracy.
et le pays proteste
People
déjà.
are protesting,
Mais en un mois,
but in 1 month,
Trump a fait
Trump
plus de
did
mal à
more
l'Amérique
harm
qu'en
to
4 ans
America
de sa
than in
dernière
4 years
présidence.
of his last
Nous
presidency.
étions en guerre
We
contre
were
un
at war against a
dictateur,
dictator.
nous nous battons
We now
désormais contre un
fight
dictateur
against a
soutenu par un
dictator
traître.
supported by a traitor. Trump said he needed to be president to restore respect for the United States. This is the level of respect we have now facilitated from the world community. I will show some interesting data that I wanted to throw out there, some positive data, because we've got a lot of negative news with the death of the U.S.-Ukraine alliance. The Spanish are heavily in support of sending troops, peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. 81.7% of Spaniards support the deployment of European and Spanish peacekeeping troops to Ukraine.
Didzy's 3D has donated $100.
Whoa!
0.
My goodness, that's a huge donation. Disney's, thank you so much. I don't know if that's a birthday gift because my birthday was 2 days ago. I don't know if that's for the burnt house. Maybe both. Or maybe you just thought I was pretty today. Either way, thank you so much. I appreciate that, buddy. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Man, I never know how to react to big donations like that. I don't know if I should do like a cartwheel. I should get like confetti out and throw it up into the sky. Woohoo. True honors, okay? True honors. 81.7% support. You want to know something that's interesting about the support, though? Look at it on party lines. The left-wing parties in Spain support Ukraine more than the rest of the parties in Spain. 95.2% for Spain's leftist party. 95.2% of Spanish leftists in the party want to send Spanish troops to Ukraine. Now, I know that this might seem a little strange. And of course, in the United States, Democrats tend to be more supportive of Ukraine. There tends to be, the people who more respect liberal democracy tend to respect Ukraine's fight to defend its liberal democracy more and its sovereignty and the agreements we made with them, credibility. But when it comes to Spain, this is history. Back during the Spanish Civil War, when Francisco Franco, the Spanish fascist, supported by Mussolini and Hitler, tried to overthrow the government, it was the Spanish left and Republicans. And when I talk about Republicans, I don't mean the GOP that bends over for the destruction of the checks and balances. I mean Republicans who care about republicanism, who care about democracy, who care about representation of the people, who care about a people ruling its government, not necessarily having a government headed by an autocrat the other way around, ruling the people, controlling what they can and cannot do, and stifling civil liberty, stifling freedom, smothering it in the bed. And those Spaniards fought against it as the rest of the world turned away from Spain. They were international volunteers from Ireland, from the United States. Hemingway, one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author, he went there to cover the war. I would recommend some of his reports. But my point is, they remember to be being in a life or death struggle for republicanism against a fascist onslaught. They remember that. And they remember being abandoned. They remember seeing the rest of Europe watch as Spain gets strangled by the fascists before they then meet the same fate because they didn't want to act preemptively. And I don't think the Spanish have any intentions of leaving Ukraine high and dry like they were left high and dry. Hey, Mercado Media, thank you so much for the Twitch raid of 13. Look at that. Mercado Media's on Twitch now? That's good to know. You guys should go follow him on his Twitch account. Anyway, point is, I'm really happy to see strong Spanish support for Ukraine, and particularly strong Spanish left-wing support for Ukraine. So you might not just be seeing French or maybe German peacekeepers, or British. Well, with German, French, and no, it was French and British almost for sure. Germans on the fence, but Spanish too. That's a positive development. Positive development. Speaking of the Germans, sorry, I got a little flustered there because the Germans have not announced, because the current Chancellor Olaf Scholz said he doesn't want to send troops to Ukraine, where the incoming Chancellor Merz is more aggressive on the issue. And I want to read some of his message. I want to read what he says Europe needs to do on defense, because he's talking about massive investments and what the Germans can do to make up the difference now that the United States has abandoned Ukraine. Friedrich Merz, who's expected to become Germany's next chancellor, has announced a political deal to raise hundreds of billions of euros in extra spending on defense and infrastructure. In views of the threats to our freedom and the peace on our continent, the rule for all defense now has to be whatever he takes, he said. Merz, whose conservatives won Germany's elections last month, said he and his likely coalition partners from the center-left would put new proposals to parliament next week. So for those of you who don't know, the CDU got 38% of the vote. So they didn't have enough for a coalition. They didn't have enough to just rule on themselves. So they had to make a coalition, and that coalition was with Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats. And so one of the ways that they're trying to, get more funds to support Ukraine and to support German reindustrialization when it comes to defense has been through, wait 1 second. I got distracted by something. Has been through the lifting of the German debt brake. So in Germany, they are very, very aggressive on a debt limit because they want to keep the credibility of their bonds. They want to keep the credibility as Germany is a wise place to invest your money. And Germany is viewed that way, and they want to keep that reputation. And so Merkel put in place during her administration, and this is Merkel parties, the CDU, a debt brake to stop them from going over a certain limit. Merz is now suggesting to get rid of that debt brake, which was actually what Olaf Scholz suggested to do when his coalition with the liberals fell apart.
Corrupt, bankrupt.
So Olaf Scholz's government collapsed a year before it was supposed to. And the reason why was because he wanted to send more aid to Ukraine. He wanted to spend more on defense spending. But he also wanted to invest in infrastructure. And all of this costs money to a point because of the position Germany's in right now that they would have to take on debt. But the FDP, the liberals they were aligned with in their traffic light coalition, did not want to do it. So the coalition fell apart. They had an election, and now the conservatives are going to do it anyway. So congratulations, Christian Lichtner. You have truly achieved nothing. Okay, continuing on this. Friedrich Merz, who's expected to become Germany's next chancellor, has announced a political deal to raise hundreds of billions of euros in extra spending on defense and infrastructure. In the view of the threats to our freedom and peace on our continent, the rule for our defense now has to be whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. He has spoken of the need for urgency on German spending in light of, and I quote, recent decisions by the American government. Now, he talks about Merz, the need for an independent European foreign policy, for Europe to be strong in defending its own peace and security separate from the United States in the face of these new proposals, in the face of America's abandonment. Now, I agree that lifting that debt limit and, making sure you invest that money is the first step. But also, he needs to be able to make the decisions that Olaf Scholz was not willing to make. And now that all the pressure is on Europe, we don't have time to not make these decisions anymore. They need to send Ukraine the Taurus missile, and they need to give them permission to fire it into Russia. They needed to do it yesterday, but now that the United States has stopped sharing HIMARS with Ukraine, is not sharing intelligence, is not allowing them to use their systems for long-range strikes anymore, they don't have it. They've lost. They don't have those long-range systems. They're not able to undermine the Russian advance from the rear like they were before. And they need to be able to do that if you expect them to put the Russians in an unfavorable enough position that they'll be forced to negotiate. And that's the hope. That's the goal, to force the Russians to come to the table with the Ukrainians, not the Ukrainians to accept Russian terms and to reward them and encourage them to do it again. And that's going to mean fighting the Russians in a way that's winnable. And NATO defense planning against Russia has always been long-range strikes. It has always been, we're going to fire missiles 300, 400 miles behind the rear, 200 miles behind the rear. We're going to take out their ammo supplies. We're going to take out their vehicle storage. We're going to take out their logistics hubs. We're going to take out their command posts. We're going to cause so much chaos behind the front that the giant mass of men and material that Russia can gather to turn into a fist and then throw into its enemies and smash and smash and smash again with its population, bringing more of their men into the grave, but advancing their strategic goals through brute force. They can't do it if they can't get the supplies to the front line. So American defense planning, NATO defense planning, European defense planning against the Russians has always been long-range strikes. Yet, we wanted to hold the Ukrainians to a different standard for the vast majority of this war. You can't do that. If we went to war with Russia, we would do it. We would do long-range strikes. The Germans would. The French would. The British would, if they faced a war with the Russians, because it's the logical conclusion. But the Ukrainians were kept back from doing it. The Ukrainians, when they ignored some of these, restrictions and did invasions in the Kursk, they saw some gains. It makes you wonder if they didn't do that invasion in 2023 down in Zaporizhia and instead focused it on Belgorod and didn't listen to these constraints from a government that would soon backstab them, maybe they would have gotten more progress. Who knows? Shoulda, coulda, woulda. Point is, though, Europe needs to pick up the pace, not only when it comes to defense procurement, but when it comes to permissions, to show itself as a credible threat to the Russians. Because now that's Europe's job. America's not a credible threat to the Russians. If Trump changed his mind tomorrow and got right back in Ukraine's corner, the Russians wouldn't believe it because they would see him as flip-flopping. That was the problem with Syria and Erdogan, trying to make it like they seriously are going to stay in support. You can't make that serious argument if you're flip-flopping on it. You can't. And so the Americans are not a credible deterrent anymore. America cannot be trusted as an ally the way it used to be. It makes many Brits and others, definitely with J.D. Vance's quotes about, an army that's never fought in a war in forever. I don't know if you guys heard that on Fox when J.D. Vance said this. Like, these European countries talking about sending all these troops to Ukraine. They haven't fought a war in forever, like 40, 50 years. J.D. Vance supposedly took part in the war on terror, right? British soldiers died in Afghanistan. Germans died in Afghanistan. Frenchmen died in Afghanistan. They didn't die in Iraq. They didn't think that was a good idea. But they died in Afghanistan. Did you know Ukrainians also died in the region as well? That's not a well-known fact, but they did. And so a lot of people are starting to ask, and I do want to end this segment with just this sense of European betrayal for the Americans who might not understand. Imagine you're a British soldier who, after 9/11, got on a plane, went to Afghanistan, and fought in caves for a decade. Seeing your boys kick mines and go up into the sky. And you're doing this for what? Not the protection of London, not the protection of these other places. I mean, you could say that they also are the threat of terror, but this was all, it started from 9/11. Do you think they feel stupid right now for having participated or coming to our aid when we were attacked? Do you think they feel stupid? Because when J.D. Vance talks about them in that way, that's how they feel. That's the reaction we're getting. One of distaste, like their sacrifice is not respected. Like Trump is not respecting the people who laid down their lives to defend the United States after we were attacked. And so not only is this strategically horrific, it's also morally repulsive. Not only for the effects it's going to have on the ground and killing all these Ukrainian civilians, but also because Europe now sees that their security is not a priority for the United States, but they took our security as a priority during the war on terror. Betrayed is probably a feeling that they have quite frequently throughout European capitals right now. I think we have one more thing I wanted to go through. We have a little segment. I'm going to go get something to drink quick. So I'm going to play the segment on MERS before we talk about the gigantic defense plan that the EU just unveiled that made me think that they might actually have like a slight tinge of seriousness about them. I want to play this quick. Respect, dude from the UK. Thank you. I appreciate that. Look, I just can't imagine having the goal to look at a country that died in caves for us after 9/11 and say, oh, you guys haven't fought like a war in 40, 50 years. What do you got to do? It's like purposely hand-waving them off. America is losing its friends on the international stage very quickly. And let me just say something. Why would the UK ever care to participate in a sanctions regime against China or to challenge the Chinese when it comes to the South China Sea or any of these things if we don't care about their security priorities? Well, definitely when they're facing so many economic problems. Now, the UK is in a difficult position due to it leaving the European Union, and now we have a lot more economic leverage as America over them. But I think my point stands that it's going to be hard to get these people to care about our security priorities in the future, whether it be a future terror attack or a challenge from, say, China in Taiwan. It's going to be really hard to get them to jump on board eagerly. Did you say Brits didn't die in Iraq? No, the French didn't die in Iraq. That's why we had the whole freedom fries thing. Because we were like, why don't you want to invade Iraq? This will be seen as a brilliant decision forever. So the European Union is starting to get serious now that the bell has been rung by Washington and the abandonment by Trump of Ukraine has made itself clear. The EU has unveiled its EU leadership a $800 billion defense plan after the cutting of support was announced. $800 billion. Now, these were not plans that I think fell out of nowhere. These are not plans that I think just kind of, oh, snap, guys, let's scramble. Even though that's what it might feel like. And it'd be like, whoa, $800 billion, that's such a massive change. You know, the United States, sent like $110 billion over to Ukraine. So $800 billion, in defense planning for all of Europe, that's a substantial fund. And that could free up a lot of munitions and weapons and older gear to be sent to Ukraine as the newer gear is introduced to the European continent. Or hell, maybe even that newer gear could be sent straight to Ukraine to be tested and perform in the defense of Ukraine's frontline democracy. I think, though, instead, that this is something that they've been preparing for a while. That they saw the writing on the wall. They heard how Trump was talking on the campaign trail, and that's when we started to hear about the Trumpification, about the Trump-proofing of aid to Ukraine, and the Trump-proofing of the alliance to support Ukraine. So they've had an idea about the possibility of Trump going back into office and being serious about backstabbing Ukraine for a while. And so I think that these are probably extensions of discussions that happened behind closed doors for a while, but were not publicly disclosed, both to not wanting to show the Americans their hand, but probably the Russians their hand, and also because they probably wanted to avoid having to do it in the first place due to Europe's long current economic woes. But $800 billion. My God, what a massive, massive fund. So this was announced by the EU president, as well as, so it's, I believe in total, I can tell you what this is made up of. I don't need to read the article. It's made up of $650 billion worth of debt, taking. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but right now there's certain debt limits in the EU that countries cannot pass for regulatory reasons because they don't want countries to spiral into a debt crisis. And so there's like caps that countries can take on for debt, right? On top of like certain limits that countries can set for themselves, like Germany did with their debt brake, right? But what Ursula von der Leyen, the leader of the European Union and the European Commission, is saying is, how about we expand that, we lift that cap so that $650 billion worth of debt could be taken on in order to rearm Europe. And that would be on top of $150 billion in loans to boost pan-European defense. Now, this isn't it. There's some other elements as well. I think I have a few written down. Let me see if I can read this. Number one, they're going to suspend the EU deficit rules. That's what I was talking about the fact of countries being able to take on a deficit in order to expand their military production and their defense. But let me be clear, this exemption will only be an exemption for defense spending, meaning they're only able to exceed the limits by defense spending. So you're not going to see anybody, or you shouldn't see anybody saying, yay, the debt limit's gone, let me spend this on a bridge, right? Now, this would mean that this $650 billion, though, if this was to be, realistic and we actually hit that number, that would require each EU member state increasing their spending by 1.5%. Now, we can run into some immediate problems by saying, I don't know how that's going to go with the Hungarians. I don't know how that's going to go with the Slovaks. But let's continue. Another part of the plan is the joint procurement. So this is smart. One way that they want to make it so this money, this $800 billion goes further, is instead of making it so that each individual nation is going to be, I want to buy 100,000 artillery shells. Okay, I want to buy 100,000 artillery shells. Instead, the EU member states are going to come together, make a bulk order, and because they're ordering more shells together instead of separately, it costs less to produce each shell because it costs money to start up the production process, to shut it down, to, have to like bring in staff and bring them to work every time. But if you have it as one big production order, they can plan better, make it more cost effective, and therefore reduce costs for the buyer and make the dollars that the EU is putting towards their defense go further. Number three, using EU budget cohesion funds. Now, these are funds that are actually intended to help poor EU states move up closer to the standards of richer states. So, for example, these are the types of funds that would be given to a country like Romania to try to get them to the standards of a country like Germany. Or you would give, etc. You can extend it to whatever EU nation states you want to. I don't want to pick on any nation. But they want to be able to make it so those funds, instead of being used for development of poorer states, can now be used for defense articles. And then I think the last points of it was all about mobilizing private finance. This means accessing the funds in the European Savings and Investment Union and the European Investment Bank. Now, the European Investment Bank, I got to put a huge asterisk on that because technically the European Investment Bank in its charter says it cannot allow its funds to be used for weapons and such. So they're going to have to change the charter of the European Investment Bank if they're going to do that. But if you take all these funds together, you can roughly get, if everybody takes advantage of the 1.5%, $800 billion in defense procurement. Plus maybe some more depending on how the budget cohesion funds and etc. are used. Let's listen to van der Leyen announce this budget plan to boost European defense.
The proposal will be a new instrument. It will provide 150 billion euros of loans to member states for defense investment. This is about basically spending better and spending together. And we're talking about pan-European capabilities, domains, like, for example, air and missile defense, the artillery systems.
These are air and missile defense. They're going to have to massively increase production if they want to make the Russians take them seriously at all when it comes to their air defense capabilities.
missiles and ammunition, drones and anti-drone systems, but also to address other needs from cyber to military mobility, for example. This will help member states to pool demand and to buy together. And of course, with this equipment, member states can massively step up their support to Ukraine. So immediate military equipment for Ukraine. This approach of joint procurement will also reduce costs.
What is pan-Europe? Sorry, American just asked me. I assume an American was asked me what pan-European. It's like the European continent. You know, it's pan-European. They're working together. It's all the Europeans working together. Instead of talking about German industry or Italian industry, you're talking about pan-European industry. You're talking about industry across Europe. And so if you're talking about Europe as a unified entity defending against Russians, you would talk about pan-European defense, not German defense or Polish defense. Also, hello, Salty Dagger. We had some German fans in chat.
Of joint procurement will also reduce costs. It will reduce fragmentation, but it will increase interoperability and, of course, strengthen our defense industrial base. And it can be to the benefit of Ukraine, as I've just described. So this is Europe's moment, and we must live up to it.
Here's another thing I gotta say. The joint procurement is good, but they also need to make hard political decisions about where these factories are built. And I'm just gonna be blunt. They have to be built where they can produce the most at the least cost. Wherever that is, that's where they have to be built. Wherever they can produce the most with the least cost as quickly as possible and get it up and running with as little red tape as they can. These are the locations they need to build in. Now, that might mean that we're not building factories in the precincts that you want to build them in order for your incumbent politician to win election. But that is why these entities, these states, these governments need to make these decisions based upon pan-European defense. They cannot make them based upon getting reelected. Also, the European defense companies are ready, okay? They are ready. The stock market surge in them.